Today on the agenda, we welcome Delaware's Lieutenant Governor, Kyle Evans Gay, a rising voice in state leadership, and a figure whose legislative record signals where Delaware might be headed next. From championing early childhood education to defending reproductive rights, she's built a platform around access, equity, and public health. But behind the titles and the talking points are real questions about the direction of Delaware, especially for working families and small business, and parents, and they're navigating a broken system of childcare. What will it actually take to move the needle in the state where progress can be slow and politics deeply entrenched? This isn't a campaign stop, it's a conversation and a chance for Delawareans to hear directly from the woman holding one of the most influential roles in state government. Lieutenant Governor Gay, welcome to the agenda.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you coming back. Anytime a guest comes back, we feel that we've done something right. Thank you so much for coming on. Tell us a little bit about your first, was it 120 days, 130 days? How many days has it been?
Yeah, but who's counting, right? I've started to talk to people about the fact that we can't claim to be new anymore.
Yeah.
Right now, this is when people have said, thank you for settling in and let's start to see some results. So You're right, these conversations are incredibly important. We talk about transparency in government. It extends to the work that we're doing and how we are determining how we're going to best serve Delawareans. So it has been a whirlwind, especially with what's happening at the national level, to adjust to be state leaders in a time when we're fighting really on every front. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't change our values, doesn't change what got us to this point, doesn't change what the voters asked us to do. And so I've been really focused on building a team and collaborating with the governor and the cabinet to make sure that we continue to keep our eyes on that prize and delivering for Delawareans.
Yeah, the one thing that I've gathered from talking to the governor a few times is that he will not be swayed by the craziness, right? That's going on in Washington. Right. That these are some things that are going to stay consistent in our state, and we are not going to let, I guess, the situation affect education, healthcare, and so many other things to the best of their ability.
Absolutely. And it goes even down to what I've talked to a lot of Delawareans about in these past couple of months is safety and being seen and being respected as a full part of society. We know that the federal administration is attacking a lot of what we say these days vulnerable Americans, right? Vulnerable Delawareans. In some respects, we're all vulnerable in these times, but it is our obligation to stand up for those who are most affected by these policies. And I have the privilege of working with affinity groups in my office. It's an initiative that we've taken on and expanded. And not only is it an important access point where members of the community, leaders in the community, for example, faith leaders, can gather and get information from the government, that transparency, that here's what's happening, here are the facts, here are how we can help, but also for that information to flow up through. And so those community connections, emphasizing safety, emphasizing partnership, we need people to feel like they are still seen and heard and respected in our society.
And that's what I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where I think the Republican Party may have swooped in previous years, because they reached a constituent that felt as though that they were overlooked, that those particular groups weren't heard by the Democratic Party, and they flip-flopped. Is that fair?
I think that we saw in the election people turning away from thinking that the Democratic Party was standing for them. And so I draw it's a close line, all right, a kind of a tightrope I walk between making sure as Lieutenant Governor I'm representing all Delawareans, but also being very diligent about the fact that in order to do this work, we have to have the faith and the trust of a majority of Delawareans.
Yeah.
So for example, as I was campaigning up and down the state last year, and really the year before that, right?
This is the week of the first debate that I did for you.
Is it really?
It's this week.
So we see how far we've come. And let me just actually pause for one moment. I'll get back to that. I was with Councilman Owens and Bishop Gibson this past weekend. And we were marking 5 years since we all marched in protest of what happened to George Floyd. I had the realization at that moment that 5 years ago, I was not an elected official.
Right.
And to think about how much change we have seen in Delaware, how much change I have personally gone through, and the ways I am now empowered to help the people around me in so many different ways. And to think now about making sure that every Delawarean sees in this office an opportunity to be heard in that way. With our affinity groups, we inherited them. One thing that we decided to do very intentionally after hearing on the campaign trail was to reach out to the veteran community. And in partnership with Colonel Harrington, who, as you know, was on the campaign trail with me, we're developing a veterans group that isn't a commission, it's not an official place, but it is a place for leaders to come and be in community and to make sure, like I said, that that information flows both ways. I think, when I went up and down the state, the veteran community said that they weren't feeling as heard, that they didn't feel as included or cared for. But now look at the transition you've seen. House Substitute 1 for House Bill 1, led by Representative Carson, looking at both state solution to making sure that we are focused on veterans, and now we are out in the community making sure that that voice can be heard too. The Democratic Party and Delaware's government are places where everyone has a place and can be heard.
Absolutely, and we want to know, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of Delaware's government, which I don't want to do, but they are eager to hear where those gaps may be, right? So we can fix them rather than just rolling over things and things not improving. So if you're hearing that and you want to reach out, you want to have that communication, use this as your platform. Let us know on the agenda, comment, and we will make sure that information gets passed over to the appropriate parties. But tell me, really, Lieutenant Governor, how has it been?
It has been a personal transition for me, from moving from a senator to now representing the whole state. It's been a transition for our state, our government, our citizens in this time. But I see that we are really coalescing around visions that were talked about on the campaign trail that I think now we can follow through with. We talked a lot about education. There's a lot of movement in that space now in directions that people have been wanting to go for a long time, including looking at our funding formula. We continue to have Wilmington conversations around the Reading Consortium and want to continue to support movement in that space. I know there's been frustrations in the past, but in particular, I really want to focus, and the governor has acknowledged that this needs to be a priority and has been kind enough to give me the space to really build this out. But 0 through 5 education. Our Representative McBride recently had a care economy town hall here in Delaware, and she and I will often talk about the fact that 0 through 5 education is that K through 12 intervention that we never knew we needed. We keep trying to intervene in K through 12 and fix it all there, when we have to acknowledge that children, families, our economy needs that investment in 0 through 5.
It has to, and let me stop you. We've made, I would like to consider it an incentive or an investment in a company called Merck, recently.
Right.
To come here, to work here, and also to live here.
Yes.
Right? They're looking at it, I believe, for the people at home, my opinion, I believe that they're looking at it from a two-sided coin. They're saying, hey, look, not only is workforce development important, but also for their families that are transitioning here, are transferring here, that they want to make sure that their children are receiving the best education, right? That's just one example of the necessity of that 0 to 5, that I call it the stamp, right? That gets the youngsters on the right road, because that inertia is going to take them all the way through high school and college, those things that we learn right there very early on, right? And if we're not doing that, and I want to be honest with you, Lieutenant Governor, I don't think that we are. We've had the Secretary of Education on here a couple weeks ago. I am very comfortable with the decision that the governor has made in the Secretary of Education. I think that she's going to do I think that she's already doing a tremendous job, and she's done it before. I'm sold, but at the same time, as I've told her, I'm worried about the kids in the demographic that you've talked about, and those kids 5 years ago. Well, okay, now they're in 7th grade, right? Maybe 5th grade. Do we forget about them now? is it too late? What are we doing about these generations that were lost
That's right.
during our ineffectiveness?
And I think that is when you talk about 0 through 5 in the absence of the bigger picture, I think that's where a lot of people go to, right? Well, my kids are already out of there. I have a kindergartner. I'm now out of that preschool age, but I still need to work on that for other kids to have similar opportunities. I think the way that we have to think about 0 through 5 is very much from an economic standpoint as well. I was lucky enough to tour a few schools in the DC area recently with a friend and colleague of mine who's on the council there, talking about the universal programs that they have brought in and their investment in 0 through 5. One of the markers, the statistics that they focus on is the women's workforce retention and parent workforce retention. Moms and dads who are staying in the workforce because they have access to 0 through 5 care and education for their kids. And if you think about Delaware's situation, how many times did we hear our former governor, John Carney, talk about the fact that there are always more jobs in Delaware than people looking for them? We need to get people back into the workforce to fuel our local economy. And while education is great for the children and we see those outcomes you're talking about, think about the immediate economic impact, especially in some of our deserts now where childcare isn't available.
Right. And I will never pass up a time to talk about our workforce here in Delaware.
Yeah.
But let's also make sure that, and I don't think that the then governor specified, that those jobs are jobs that people can actually sustain their families on.
Right.
Right? We're not talking about jobs where they cannot. That's underemployment, and then we're going in the wrong way, the wrong direction. I think it's important and that we're bringing sustainable jobs here to Delaware, and our education is part of those draws that brings in those sustainable jobs.
It is, and as I've heard more and more people talk about, which I'm very happy to hear, we have to think about in K through 12, in really 6 through 12, how are we preparing kids to be a part of that pipeline?
Yes.
Because when Merck is coming here, they're asking, sure, what's happening in the workforce right now, but they want to know about that pipeline. And we should want to know too, because we don't want a situation where companies are just coming here and taking advantage of a benefit and then leaving.
Right.
We want to set the foundation with that benefit for additional growth over time. And so we should be thinking about investing. And I think when you see investments like the STEM Hub over at Eastside Charter, you see this acknowledgement that if we are going to be bringing companies like Merck here, we are going to need to teach Delawareans how to enter that workforce as much as any other industry that we have here.
In your big task that you have and the space that I think it's great that the governor's giving you the space to do it for education, but what are we doing in regards to letting the students know where they stand? And by that I mean I believe in proficiency testing to some extent, right? What that looks like, how it's, I don't know, but you have to have a standard. I'll just say that. You have to have a standard.
Yeah.
And there's no way that you're going to know that standard is good unless you compare it, right? And right now, we're not doing well in regards to other states.
Right.
So, and I know that when corporations come to this state to work, they're thinking about that. They're looking at that.
Yeah.
I've heard what the Secretary of Education is saying in regards to how she plans to improve that, or how she plans to improve our educational system, which will then improve the NIAP scores.
Yeah.
What is your office doing, or what is your plan in regards to that to ensure that our students are becoming smarter, better?
So, two things. One is this is the age-old question, right? And then really since No Child Left Behind and before that, we've been looking at how do we measure versus how do we give children the space to learn. And I want to be supportive of the work that the Department of Education is doing, because I know and I've heard from constituencies that they serve that they are coming in and working to be a true partner in that way. And that's the mantra that we use in the Lieutenant Governor's office. We want to be a true partner. That means coming to a table to listen as much as it is to share. That means understanding that we may need to stretch or try things that might have felt uncomfortable before, but we might need new solutions in order to serve and solve those age-old problems. When it comes to me thinking about the 0 through 5 space, I think a lot about data, and I think a lot about early learning and literacy. And one thing I know is that we need in some respects to be able to demonstrate our progress.
Yes.
Right? So we will continue to work to show our work, but how can we do it in creative and innovative ways? I know that my child, who is in kindergarten, took a sight word test at the end of the year. She took one in the beginning of the year, she took one in the end of the year. I know she doesn't know she took a sight word test, right? Because it was a game to her. Right. And I think that we can think about ways to be innovative with our testing to allow teachers to branch into topics and opportunities that are driven by students, not always just driven by the tests. I know that it's different, but we have to, I think, trust teachers. And I think we need to make sure that parents feel that they have the confidence. And like you said, that the outside world has the confidence, because that's who we're trying to bring here. We're trying to grow locally and bring people in to continue to enrich our economy.
Yeah, I believe that that's the only way for us to be successful. And I think that this administration can get that done. Yeah. I just want to make sure that the public understands exactly what you're doing. And you've talked about what you're doing in your town hall series, right? You've gone up and down the state. I mean, the lieutenant governor, regardless of who you are, you're never bored.
I'm never bored. I'm never bored. Talk to my husband about how he said, wait, what are you doing this week?
Yeah.
Wait, what day are you coming home? So no, and again, I also have to emphasize how much this is really a family endeavor for us. And I give all props to my husband, to my kids, to my parents, who continue to be a part of this public service work that we do together. But I'm really excited about the Town Hall series. We've been so far to Middletown, to Rehoboth, and we'll be in Milford next in June. And so I encourage people to go onto our website to sign up for the newsletter. You can see where we're going to be for our Town Hall series. We're going to head up and down the state, and we're going to continue to do this work and be in community with people. It's another place we're on the campaign trail. We heard very clearly, and that's what I like about Delawareans. They're straight shooters, and they'll tell you what you need.
And you can't get away from them. You see them in the Wawa, you see them everywhere.
But everyone said, it's nice that you're here during a campaign year, but when are you going to come back? And so we're trying to not just say, it's this year, we're trying to prove it, right? So we'll be having those town hall series. We'll be in Wilmington soon enough, and want to make sure that people know where to find us. We're engaging local leaders in those conversations. We've had mayors and county council people come out to those events. And really, this is a conversation. Again, what can we do on your behalf? We have the privilege of sitting in this office. I have the privilege of serving as lieutenant governor. It is not about me. It is about what can I do with this office to better serve Delaware. Yeah. And we want the constituents, we want Delawareans to guide that answer as much as I'm trying to guide that answer and figure it out.
Early on in my career, I worked at the Salvation Army at 4th and Orange Street, and it was great. I mean, it was straight out of school, and I felt I could change the world. And it was the first time that I met then Lieutenant Governor John Carney, because he just came in and assisted a family. And as Lieutenant Governor, it was no big deal, and he had his messenger bag on, and the family went, and they went to some state service center and were working through an issue. And I was like, wow, Lieutenant Governor actually comes and does social work to that extent. Is that still happening?
We have, I have a director of operations who I'm lucky enough served with me in the Senate as well. And she has been able to really bring that ethos of serving that Senate community to doing what we can on behalf of the state. And so if people have concerns, or they have questions, or they're confused, or they need access, we try and work with both the local senators and representatives or our federal representatives and senators in order to make sure that they get the right services they need. We're not always the best place to solve the problem, but if Department of Labor is, if Department of Ed is, if it's a local school district, we want to make sure that people feel connected to the services that are available to them. That is what government is supposed to do. It is to serve. And so we want to be that connector.
And the constituent, in most cases, is paying for it.
That's right. That's right.
These are your services that you need to take advantage of, not because you're entitled. You are entitled, but you're paying for this, right?
Absolutely.
So a lot of times you don't know where those services are. And like you're saying, you're just a gatekeeper to those services and getting through them and pointing the constituent in the right direction.
And we want that goes back to your point about transparency, right? It goes back to your point about letting people know what's happening. And we're going to endeavor through the town halls, through the newsletter, through opportunities like this to speak to a wider audience, to make sure people understand what we're working towards and making sure that they have an ability to let us know if that's the right or wrong way to go.
I'm anxious to see where you go. I know it's early, but what are your ideas? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I really want to make sure that we have an opportunity in this administration to turn those numbers on education around. And I believe that working on a funding model for 0 through 5, starting to change the conversation, making sure that we have more classrooms, building a pipeline through Delaware State University's ECIC program, any ways that we can get the workforce, parents, and the government and private business backing a clear vision for education would be the greatest gift that this administration, I think, can give to Delaware. Like you said, these things take time. There are bureaucracies, but you have a governor and a lieutenant governor who believe in innovating, who believe in trying new things, and who believe in trusting Delawareans and working with them as we craft a new solution moving forward. So I'm incredibly excited about the opportunity to transform education. But at the end of the day, we also have to think about education as a way to shape the economy that Delaware needs for the next 20 and 30 years. I ran as a new generation of leader in Delaware. I hope to govern that way. My goal is to make sure not only that I have economic opportunities in 20 years, because I'll still be in the workforce, but that my children also have those economic opportunities, that our next generation coming up feel that Delaware is a place they can invest, and that as technology rapidly changes and as the economy rapidly changes, that we are looking at every opportunity to make sure that Delaware is financially successful.
Yes, and I think that people don't, for a generation, they don't know about our generation where we had a GM and a Chrysler within 12 miles of one another. I think that's fair. We had DuPont, which was massive, over 20,000 employees. The state was a huge employer at that time as well. And then we had MBNA, and we had less than 1 million people in the state. But look at all those jobs and opportunities, and I don't think they understand the history. And that history has caused an expectation for me. Right? I'm like, daggone, we can do this again. I don't know what we had to do in order to make that happen, or what type of solicitation, but I believe that we can do it again.
We can.
Let me talk about something that worries me on a national level, and I know that it worries you, and that's our Medicaid system that is in jeopardy of the way in which we've become accustomed to it benefiting our constituents.
That's right.
Is that fair?
Absolutely.
And
unfortunately,
I remember, I believe it was early on within the first week or so of Governor Meyer's campaign, he made it clear that he had a fund set aside for in case things go crazy fund, and assured Delawareans that he would do his best to protect them to the best of his ability. What is the feeling in Dover? What is the feeling in the administration about how things are going in regards to Medicaid?
I think that the feeling's twofold. One is that, like you said, absolute commitment to making sure that we do everything possible for the constituencies that we're served, for Delawareans that receive services. And I'll talk a little bit about the bigger picture there, and why that matters for even folks who aren't receiving that Medicaid help. But I think also there is a fear that we are fighting on so many fronts that we just need to keep ahead of it, right? That we're just trying to stay above water. That's why I'm really grateful for the work that the Department of Justice is doing, our Attorney General taking the actions alongside other like-minded states to push back and to get these important stays on the cuts that were kind of dictated coming down. But I want to go back and really talk about this idea that the commitment to making sure that that critical funding helps certain populations in Delaware, many populations in Delaware, it affects our entire ecosystem and our health ecosystem. Without that critical...
And it's just not poor people that utilize this.
And even, I put out a statement about this, even what I said was, and I'll say it again today, we will all pay somehow. Some of us will pay with our health. Others of us will pay with just the additional costs. Because our hospitals are able to continue to operate because they know that they can receive reimbursement for serving everyone who comes into the door, right? If there is a general practitioner or a specialist and they're 40%, 50% of their population loses some kind of funding, then they can't stay in operation. And then we lose that specialty out of our ecosystem. And now you have Delawareans who may be private pay or might be otherwise insured, and they're having to travel farther or even maybe seek a lower quality of care. And that's unacceptable. And so really what we have to think about with Medicaid is that it's part of an ecosystem of healthcare that is imperfect, that we could improve, but that is necessary to keep that level of service and care and long-term investment in our health. I mean, I work with other state leaders looking at our employee benefits, which is just one portion of the healthcare perspective here in Delaware. But we know that we have to invest in health, or else individuals and the state will continue to be underwater and being unable to pay for the negative consequences that poor health.
And there's enough data out there that proves that,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
that proves that emphatically. But there are still a section of leadership, I'll say, that just disagrees with that overall model. Is that fair to say?
I think they disagree with the story. I think they agree with a story that's being told about the model instead of taking the time to understand how these critical systems are serving our entire state and serving Americans in other states as well. And I think it gets to the point where you have to seek out the facts.
Yes.
You have to study what's going on. You have to do your best to change it in ways that make it demonstrably better for Delawareans. But you can't just take it at face value, what someone is telling you.
Right.
And that's what makes that transparency, that knowledge so hard about government, because it's so big. But we can have these conversations and do better at telling people and sharing with people real stories about individuals in our communities that are affected by these changes.
But why aren't the facts enough?
It's a great question. And I think it goes back sometimes to that trust piece and making sure that people have faith in the work we're doing.
Yeah.
And so it's really drives my belief and my commitment to building faith and trust in what we're doing. And I might be able to do that I know I can do it on a one-on-one basis. I know I can sit down with people.
You can win them at the table.
But 1 million people times a half hour is maybe unsustainable. And so I think we need to make sure that we are empowering other trusted local leaders. Like I said, with our faith leaders group, with our LGBTQ plus leaders group, with our Hispanic leaders group, we have the ability to empower individuals to be that for their communities. And that's powerful because then that is partnership. And because, like I said, that partnership goes both ways. And I am empowered because people share with me what they know about what their community is experiencing, what their community needs, what someone who maybe is an undocumented mom of 2 citizens in a Wilmington school, what she's afraid to say. But her voice is very important.
Yeah.
And when that voice and that perspective makes it to state leadership, that is when we know that we are doing the work on behalf of everyone.
Tell us in the final minute, how can folks at home be involved in these affinity groups and get that message across?
So I would say signing up for our newsletter. And there's a link there to sign up for our newsletter.
Okay.
That gets information about the town halls, information about different affinity groups, and making sure that we are tapping into leaders in different areas. And you can request a meeting, request an event to make sure that if it's important for me to be there and see what's happening, I want to try and do that to the best of my ability. Of course, with everyone remembering, I have a 6 and 8-year-old and I will go to those softball games.
Yes.
I will not miss the softball games. But I do love being with people, and I find that that is the way that we build that faith and that trust. And so we're going to keep doing that work. We're going to keep working with the legislature, our partners there, keep working with the Office of the Governor and his cabinet to make sure that we can do the best on behalf of Delawareans.
Well, Lieutenant Governor, as always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our relationship has come full circle. We were doing debates. Now we're here talking about current issues.
That's right.
So I look forward to what the next conversation will be. You always have a home here, right here on the agenda.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kerwin.
Today's conversation with Lieutenant Governor Kyle Evans-Gay made one thing clear. Healthcare, especially Medicaid, should never be treated as a political football. It is a promise, a safety net, a reflection of who we are and what we value. Delaware is moving to expand Medicaid and serve its most vulnerable. But on a national stage, we're seeing something else. Proposals to cut over $900 billion for Medicaid, roll back protections, shift responsibility away from those in power and onto the backs of working families. Today, every member of Congress, Democrat and Republican alike, your constituents are watching. And to every voter, you have power in this too. Let your elected officials know you will no longer tolerate this. Let them know that stripping health care from the poor and the elderly and the disabled, it's not accepted. I don't care if it's in a budget solution or what, it's just not accepted. The neglected is not governance, okay? And that party line won't shield anyone from accountability. It won't. This is the agenda. I'm Kerwin Gaines. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay loud because silence won't save us. We'll see you next time, right here on the agenda.